Welcome back. Beijing's dangerous behavior doesn't stop at the coronavirus pandemic. Just this month, we learned of Chinese spies trying to infiltrate U.S. lawmakers and politicians, as well as a host of American universities and businesses, which we'll get to later in the show. And now there are reports that Disney CEO Bob Iger is interested in serving as America's ambassador to China. So how will Beijing use this opportunity to further influence and manipulate the U.S.? Let's bring Gordon Chang back in. He is the author of The Great U.S.-China Tech War. Follow him on Twitter at Gordon G. Chang. Gordon, Bob Iger as U.S. ambassador to China. Why should we find this troubling?
We should find it troubling because of Beijing's reaction to Iger as ambassador. Look, Bob Iger is one of the most capable individuals on earth, but he, of course, is part of a Hollywood elite that has been craven to Beijing, and especially Disney, during his tenure as chief executive. So Beijing would view the appointment of Iger as a signal from the Biden administration that Biden wanted to cooperate, and he felt that the U.S. was absolutely in a position that it had to. Now, Chinese leaders right now are extremely arrogant. We know this from that lecture by Professor Di Dongsheng of Renmin University at the end of November, where they're just chortling about how they can manipulate the U.S. political system to get the outcomes that they want. So sending over somebody like Iger is going to, I think, reinforce a very bad attitude in Beijing. I think that we either should send no ambassador or send, for instance, a human rights advocate to tell China, look, we're not scared of you.
Gordon, what are some of the other major companies and just areas of industry? I mean, I think when people understand the influence, the corporate influence that China has on us, on our corporations, that really starts to hit home. We've seen some of this with NBA players, for example. I think that in the pop culture, that really made a big mark in people's minds. Hold on a second. NBA players won't speak out against China? What's that all about? Where else do we see this? Where are the troubling signs of the infiltration of major American corporations by the CCP?
Well, it's even worse than that, Buck, because it's NBA players not speaking out against racism. Remember, with this whole issue of the NBA in China, started over Hong Kong, but a number of those NBA players have shoe contracts with a company called Nike. And remember, Nike had many of its shoes made in a facility that resembles a concentration camp, and that the inmates were actually minorities who had no choice but to work there. But, to answer your question, we're talking about almost every industry. So, for instance, tech, Google, for instance, they all want to be in China, Facebook. And so, therefore, even though they're not permitted now, they do, I think, tread very lightly when it comes to Beijing. You take, for instance, the big farm companies. They want to sell to China. The companies that make tractors, they want to sell to China. This is just across the board. There is almost no industry that doesn't want to be in China in a big way.
And we've also seen in Hollywood and in the media, there's a tremendous influence, Gordon. They removed the Taiwanese flag from the back of Tom Cruise in a remake of the classic Top Gun. Great flick, great movie. I didn't see the remake. But they're making those kinds of gestures. How pervasive is it now, you think, in our cultural institutions that they just will skirt around criticism or even just giving any kind of offense to sensibilities, not of just the Chinese people, but more specifically of the ruling class in China?
Yeah, well, we've certainly seen that with Disney, since we're talking about Bob Iger. For instance, they did that film which had in the original book a Tibetan spiritual figure who became a Celtic in the movie because they felt that if any mention of Tibet would be harmful to their prospects at Disney. And of course, you had Mulan, the film about the Chinese warrior. That was actually made in what the Chinese call Xinjiang. And there was a thank you in the credits to a public security bureau that runs a concentration camp-like facility. I mean, have you seen Richard Gere in a leading role in a long time? Well, no, because he's a Tibetan activist. And so it just goes down this scene. There have been so many movies where at the end, for some reason, the Chinese come in and save the planet. So that's another indication of really what is a thorough penetration of Hollywood. And it's not like the Chinese intimidate them. People there are intimidated by themselves. They're just so worried about what China may think that they self-censor and they accept scripts and do movies which have no offense to China.
We know that we've heard a lot recently about a couple of high-profile individuals in the U.S. that have been the subject of at least some overture of influence operation from China. Eric Swalwell, now a member of the Intelligence Committee in the House of Representatives, and also Joe Biden's son, Hunter. What do you make of those kinds of operations? Because we focus in on these two, and those are high-profile individuals. But what do you think of those two? Tell me that in those cases. But also, is this a widespread and systematic program of trying to insert agents of influence or even groom agents of influence all across the U.S. power and industrial complex?
Well, we've certainly seen China try to groom American politicians. So, for instance, that suspected Ministry of State Security agent, Christine Fong, first contacted Swalwell, not while he was sitting on the House Intel Committee, which of course would be of great interest to China, but when he was a council member in Dublin City, California, which suggests that China has been grooming people all across the U.S., which means there must be hundreds, if not thousands, of Ministry of State Security agents in the U.S. And by the way, there are actually hundreds of thousands of collectors of information for China at any one time, because China has this 1,000 grains of sand approach. They interview returning business people, students, tourists to get little bits of information, which they then collate. So this has been going on for decades, Buck. And the fact that they tried to shovel money into the son of a sitting vice president, that'd be Hunter Biden, should be no surprise.
And Gordon, just give the folks watching this some sense of, the Chinese security apparatus is known for an unprecedented degree, especially when you add the scale of it, of not just censorship, but also monitoring and surveillance. Are the Chinese security agencies paying attention to what's going on over here too? I mean, TikTok obviously got in the center of this conversation back in September. Is that a real concern? The Chinese are monitoring people here?
Oh, absolutely. They certainly are doing that. And they've got a much bigger operation than the Russians do. The TikTok algorithm probably has been modified in order to get people in America to do what Beijing wants. And that's what a number of national security experts are concerned about. Got to remember one thing, that the reason why the State Department closed the Houston consulate in July instead of any of the other 4 consulates is because Radio Free Asia reported that an intelligence unit of the People's Liberation Army actually based themselves in the Houston consulate. And from there, they used big data and artificial intelligence to identify Americans likely to participate in the Black Lives Matter and Antifa protests. And then the PLA, the Chinese military, sent those Americans videos on how to riot. And they did that through TikTok. So clearly, China's been trying to do this. And I think that, we can discuss TikTok forever. But clearly, Beijing does not want to give up control of that app because it is using it to influence American public opinion.
Gordon, we're going to have you back whenever this intelligence report on possible Chinese efforts to influence the 2020 election actually comes out. There may be an executive summary that's declassified at some point in the near future. In the meantime, Gordon, thank you for your expertise. We always appreciate seeing you.